What are you doing?
Weapon. Never, ever forget. The SA80 individual weapon cannot, under any circumstances, be fired from the left shoulder. Do so, the cocking handle will break your jaw, and you'll get a face full of red-hot metal casings, even when firing blanks. Afraid that's the standard issue British Army rifle. Learn to love it.
Yes, Major Curtis.
Not your fault, you didn't design the bastard.
The SA80 occupies a strange position in small arms discourse. Few service rifles in the world attract this volume of reflexive contempt, most of it aimed at a version of the weapon that left frontline service over 2 decades ago. The charge sheet is familiar, unreliable, fragile, a national embarrassment, and for one specific rifle, the L85A1, as issued through the late 80s and the 90s, a good deal of that is fair. This video does not dispute it. But the rifle carrying that reputation today is not the L85A1, it's the A2 and the A3, extensively modified weapons that reliability tested to a completely different standard. And the comparison the SA80 is always measured against, the American M16, is worth examining honestly, because the rifle held up as the benchmark had an introduction to service that was not just troubled, it was lethal to the men carrying it. 2 rifles then, both branded failures early, 1 fair trial. Deal with the A1 first, honestly, because the defense is worthless otherwise. The L85 entered service in 1985, and in service it developed a genuine list of faults. The magazine could be released by accidental pressure on the catch, dropping it from the weapon. Firing pins broke. The extractor and related small components suffered failures. The plastic furniture cracked and in places shed parts. Performance degraded badly in extreme cold and in hot, dusty conditions. The failings exposed most publicly during the 1991 Gulf campaign and in Arctic trials. The troops who carried it had a name for it, the civil servant, because it didn't work and you couldn't fire it. The underlying problem was not the concept. The bullpup layout was sound. The problem was execution and quality control at the point of manufacture. The rifle was rushed, and the tooling and production standards did not match the design's demands. The distinction matters because it defines what could and could not be fixed. A bad concept cannot be modified into a good rifle. A sound concept, badly built, can be, if someone is willing to strip it back and re-engineer the failure points, which is exactly what happened. But before that, the comparison. Because the standard the L85A1 is always judged against, the M16, did not arrive fully formed either. It arrived in Vietnam, and the manner of its arrival killed people. Hold one question through what follows, because the whole video turns on it. This rifle did all of this, and it was forgiven. The SA80 never was. When the M16 reached American troops in Vietnam, it was accompanied by a marketing proposition that has since become infamous, that the rifle was effectively self-cleaning and required little maintenance. Acting on that, rifles were issued without cleaning kits, and men were not trained to maintain them. At the same time, the ammunition was changed. Eugene Stoner had designed the rifle and cartridge around a specific propellant, an extruded or stick powder. The powder loaded into the ammunition actually issued was a ball propellant. The substitution had consequences the troops paid for. The ball powder burned dirtier, depositing more fouling in the gas system and chamber. It also drove the rifle's cyclic rate up beyond its original design assumptions, worsening wear and malfunctions. And the early chambers were not chrome lined. Combined with the fouling, the humidity and the lack of cleaning equipment, chambers corroded and fouled to the point where fired cases seized in place. The extractor would tear through the case rim, leaving the case stuck in the chamber and the rifle out of action until it could be cleared with a cleaning rod down the muzzle, assuming the soldier had one. The documented result is among the grimmest episodes in the history of the service rifle. Investigators and contemporary accounts recorded American soldiers and Marines found dead in their fighting positions beside rifles that had been stripped or with cleaning rods still in the barrel, killed while trying to clear a stoppage. The M16 was fixed, chrome-lined chambers, a buffer to control cyclic rate, cleaning kits and training turned it into the rifle it should have been. The point is not that the M16 was a bad rifle. It became one of the most successful service rifles ever built. The point is that the benchmark itself had a bloody adolescence, and nothing in the SA80's history, for all its faults, approaches the documented battlefield consequences of the M16's Vietnam introduction. The SA80's fix came at the turn of the century. Between roughly 2000 and 2002, around 200,000 rifles were passed through a comprehensive modification program carried out by Heckler & Koch, producing the L85A2. There's a detail here worth stating plainly because it undercuts the Germans had to save the useless British rifle framing that usually accompanies the fact. At the time, the modification was contracted and executed. Heckler & Koch was British owned, part of the Royal Ordnance British Aerospace Group. The modification was not cosmetic. It re-engineered the identified failure points, the cocking handle, the firing pin, the extractor, the magazine, the gas system, the hammer and related components. The result was validated under trial. The upgraded L85A2 went on to post reliability figures that placed it among the more dependable service rifles in NATO use throughout the 2000s. That is the crux of the reputation problem. The rifle that earned the contempt, the A1, was withdrawn and modified out of existence 2 decades ago. The contempt outlived the object. It became a cultural fixture detached from the weapon actually in the racks. The current standard is the L85A3, a further upgrade delivered from around 2018. It is not a new rifle, it is the same sound concept refined again. On the personal side, and this is testimony, not data, I fired both the A2 and the A3. Both were accurate rifles, not adequate, accurate. The bullpup layout and the barrel put the shots where they're pointed, and they do it consistently. The honest criticism is weight. The SA80 is not a light rifle, and you feel it on a long carry. The weight buys something most critics never account for, barrel length. The SA80's barrel is 518mm, a little over 20 inches. In a conventional rifle, a 20-inch barrel means a long overall weapon. The bullpup layout folds that full-length barrel into a package no longer than a carbine. And a barrel length is not cosmetic with a 5.56. Standard 5.56 ball does most of its work, not by the hole it drills, but by yaw and fragmentation. On impact, the bullet turns, and if it arrives fast enough, it breaks up at the cannula, producing a wound far larger than its caliber suggests. That fragmentation depends on the round arriving above a threshold velocity, and the figures cited in the wound ballistics literature for standard 55 grain ball sits somewhere between about 2.5 and 2,700 feet per second. Sources disagree on exact number, and it shifts with how the bullet is built. Below that band, the bullet still yaws, but it tends to stay intact and pass through, and the wound is much smaller. Because velocity bleeds off with range, that threshold carries a distance, a fragmentation range, beyond which the round's effectiveness falls away. And muzzle velocity, which sets where that range ends, is the direct function of barrel length. The numbers are stark. From a full 20-inch barrel, standard ball holds fragmentation velocity out roughly 200 yards. From the 14.5-inch carbines is usually measured against, that can fall to around 100. The SA80's barrel is 518mm, a full 20 inches, folded by the bullpup layout into a weapon no longer than those carbines. So it holds fragmentation to something close to twice the range of an M4 length carbine from the same overall length. That is the entire point of the layout, and it's the thing it's heavy and old criticism never accounts for. So, fail. The L85A1, substantially yes. A sound design let down by rushed poor quality manufacture, fielded before it was ready. The criticism is earned, and no honest account erases it. The M16, at its Vietnam introduction, worse and deadlier. A benchmark rifle whose early failings are quietly forgotten, while the SA80s are endlessly rehearsed. The L85A2 and A3, no. A re-engineered, trial-validated weapon that has served reliably for over 20 years, delivering a longer effective envelope than the carbines it's compared to, from a package no bigger than they are, at a level of accuracy its reputation would never lead you to expect. There's an asymmetry worth naming because it's the real subject here. The M16's Vietnam record was worse than anything the SA80 did, and the M16 was forgiven completely. No one now picks up an M16 and thinks of dead men beside jammed rifles. The SA80 never got that amnesty, despite a lesser crime and more thorough fix. Part of that is cultural, and it cuts both ways. There's something particularly British in the readiness to keep our own equipment's failure on permanent record. And there's the layout problem. The American shooting culture never took to the bullpup the way much of Europe did. A rifle already carrying a bad reputation walked into a market predisposed against its layout before a shot was fired. So the SA80 takes fire from both directions, remembered at home for a failure that was fixed, and dismissed abroad for a design that the market was never sold on. But the deeper reason is simpler than either. The rifle's reputation was fixed before most people who hold it ever handled an A2 or an A3. The verdict was reached on the A1, and it never went back to check. The reputation stopped tracking the rifle a long time ago. The failure was real. It was also specific, and it was fixed a generation ago. What survives is a fossil of the A1 era, applied to the rifles the men who carried the A1 would barely recognize.